Pablo hated cocaine. He used to say, I prefer to send that poison to Europeans, to Americans, but my people here are not going to be poisoned with this.
This is one of Pablo Escobar's henchmen decades after his fall, explaining there how his mind worked.
He chose his customers and protected his community, but poisoned everyone else's while building one of the most profitable supply chains of the 20th century alongside Henry Ford and cars. $420 million every week. And he did it from a country most Americans couldn't find on a map at that time, before he was 30 years old. He was a farmer's son from a Colombian town most people couldn't find on a map. He saw a market that didn't exist yet, built a supply chain that no government could stop, and became the most powerful businessman in the world. Not the most powerful criminal, the most powerful businessman. The distinction matters. Because the reason he fell wasn't the government. It wasn't the DIA. It was a mistake that has destroyed companies, careers, and empires for 100 years. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that mistake was. And you'll recognize it because you've seen it happen in boardrooms, not just in Medellin. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949, in Rio Negro, a small town in the mountains of Antioquia. His father farmed. His mother taught school. They were not poor by Colombian standards, but in a country defined by staggering inequality, middle class meant you could see the ceiling very clearly. Colombia in the 1970s was an economy built almost entirely on coffee. The land was rich. The opportunity wasn't. And just to the north, the United States was entering a decade-long love affair with cocaine. Demand was exploding. Supply barely existed. Escobar saw that gap at 22 years old. Not as a criminal opportunity, as a market inefficiency. He started small. Tombstone theft. Fake lottery tickets. Cigarette smuggling. He was running errands for local operators, watching how money moved, learning which routes worked and which ones got you caught. He was studying business. He just didn't go to Harvard. By his mid-20s, he was moving product for the most powerful cocaine trafficker in Medellin, a man named Fabio Restrepo. Escobar worked under him, learned the routes, learned the customers, learned who the officials were and what they cost. In 1975, Fabio Restrepo was murdered. The circumstances were never officially confirmed. But the next morning, every one of Restrepo's men received the same message: you work for Pablo Escobar now. Every business school has a name for that move. They call it a hostile acquisition. You eliminate the incumbent, absorb the assets, and keep the team. Mark Zuckerberg did it to Instagram in 2012, different method. Same logic. Escobar did it with a bullet. The mechanics were identical. He was 25 years old. And he had just made his first real move. The desire was simple: build a supply chain that nobody could touch. Cocaine economics in the 1970s were extraordinary. The cost of producing 1 kilogram of cocaine in Colombia was negligible. On the streets of Miami, that same kilogram sold for over $100,000. That margin, the gap between cost and price, was the most attractive market in the world. And almost nobody had figured out the logistics to capture it at scale. Escobar figured it out. Coca paste came from Peru and Bolivia and was strategically processed in Colombian jungle labs. He moved it through a private transshipment hub, which was an entire island in the Bahamas that he and co-founder Carlos Leder purchased outright. Norman's Cay, which included a private airstrip, private harbor, and 350 kilometers from the Florida coast. The cocaine landed in Miami and moved through a distribution network that reached every major city in the United States. At peak operations, 15 tons of cocaine entered the United States every single day. He owned the fields upstream, the labs, the planes, the island, even the officials who looked the other way at every step of the chain. Every dollar in the pipeline was his dollar. There were no middlemen, no margin leakage, and most importantly, no partners who could turn on him. Apple does this with chips and software. Amazon does it with warehouses and delivery trucks. Economists call it vertical integration, owning every stage of your supply chain so no one can squeeze your margins or cut you off. Escobar did it with an entire country. The Medellin cartel was generating an estimated $420 million per week at its peak. That is more than Apple earned per week in 2004, more than Exxon's weekly profit at the height of the 1980s oil boom. He had built the most efficiently run business operation in the world. And nobody in a boardroom had ever thought of him that way. Every monopoly in history has faced the same opponent. Not a competitor, but the state. Governments break up monopolies by regulating and extraditing their power. And by the early 1980s, the Colombian and American governments were looking very carefully at Medellin. Escobar's solution was not to fight. It was to make the fight unnecessary. He ran for Congress in 1982. And won. He showed up to sessions. He funded housing projects. He built football pitches in the poorest comunas of Medellin. Tens of thousands of people called him El Patron, the boss, the same word Colombians use for anyone who owns a company. Because to them, that is exactly what he was. He wasn't buying goodwill. He was building a moat, political capital, popular legitimacy, institutional access. These were barriers to entry that no competitor could replicate. He wasn't just in the cocaine business, he was in the power business. But the state was not going to stay quiet forever. And when it came, Escobar had a plan for that too. He called it plata o plomo, silver or lead, a bribe or a bullet. There was no third option. You took the money, or someone you loved was buried. Judges, generals, presidential candidates. The price was set. The choice was yours. Economists call what Escobar built regulatory capture when the entity being regulated ends up controlling the regulator. Standard Oil did it with railroad rebate agreements in the 1880s. Big Tobacco did it by funding its own medical research for decades. Escobar did it with cash in brown envelopes and hit squads on motorcycles. Different tools, identical outcome, the rules bend to the operation. For a while, it worked perfectly. The Colombian justice system was effectively paralyzed. Extradition to the United States, the one thing Escobar genuinely feared, was blocked by politicians he had bought or threatened.
How much cocaine were you personally responsible for importing during that time frame?
During that time frame, between 55 and 56 tons of cocaine went through my hands.
55 tons. Through one man's hands. Between 1981 and 1985. That is the scale of the machine Escobar had built, and that is just one coordinator's share of it. The operation was described by a DEA officer as being run by someone very charismatic, very powerful, very demanding. That is the language you use for a CEO, not a criminal. Then in 1984, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla refused. He refused the money. He started publicly exposing cartel connections in the Colombian government. He pushed for extradition. Escobar had him assassinated on April 30th, 1984, a motorcycle. 2 gunmen. In broad daylight in Bogotá. That one murder ended Escobar's political career. It turned the Colombian state from a captured regulator into an active enemy. It brought the United States into the fight at full force. And it began the war that would last nearly a decade and kill thousands of people. He declared war on the Colombian state by bombing police stations and assassinating presidential candidates. He offered a bounty for every police officer killed in Medellin, $100 a head, which resulted in over 1,000 officers dead. By 1991, exhausted by the conflict and facing mounting pressure, the Colombian government offered him a deal: to surrender for 5 years with no extradition to the United States. Escobar accepted on one condition. He would design the prison himself, one that had a football pitch, a discotheque, private bars, and even guards he had personally selected. The Colombian government called it La Catedral. His guards called it Hotel Escobar. From inside, he continued to run every operation. The supply chain didn't stop. The money kept moving. He was the CEO of a $30 billion company, filing his paperwork from a private compound he had personally designed and staffed. And then, he began to lose grasp of his dominion and influence. That recording is from 1993, now a man in hiding, moving between safe houses, a $6 million bounty on his head, 600 men hunting him, and a falling empire. Yet he still sounds like a man in control. That confidence was the trap. Here is the business lesson that nobody puts in a case study. Pablo Escobar became the face of his own operation, and that was the mistake that killed everything. The most durable operations in history are the ones nobody can name. The Cali cartel understood this completely. They operated quietly, they corrupted officials carefully and selectively, they avoided headlines, they survived Escobar's war, absorbed his market, and outlasted him by years, not because they were better at making cocaine, but because they were better at being invisible. Such as when Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple in 1985 and the company almost went under. The moment he was removed, the perceived value of the company collapsed. Only Pablo could not make the return Steve did. He was the Medellin cartel and his name was the brand, but everyone was hunting him, the DEA, the search block. Los Pepes and each of them knew exactly which angle to attack. In 1992, the government tried to transfer him to a real prison. He walked out before they arrived. 600 men deployed. $6 million bounty. For 16 months, he moved between safe houses in Medellin, the city where everyone knew his face. The search block used radio triangulation technology. Every phone call Escobar made, they traced in real time. He knew this. His own people warned him. He kept calling anyway. December 1st, 1993, his 44th birthday. He called his son. The call lasted too long. They had his location by morning.
Porque quienes conocen la historia de Robin Hood saben perfectamente que luchó y que salió en la defensa.
He knew exactly what he was doing when he said that, even if becoming the face of his operation came back to bite him. He was building a brand to become an asset to Colombia in his eyes and take the country forward. And he could not stop being it, even when it was the thing that was going to get him killed. That is not a crime only, but a brand risk story. It is the classic example of what can happen to a company where the founder becomes the product. When the founder falls, there is nothing left to catch. December 2nd, 1993, one day after his birthday. The search block surrounded the house in Los Olivos. Escobar ran for the rooftops and was shot in the torso, the feet, and the head. The most effective logistics operator of the 20th century killed by a phone call he couldn't stop making. 20,000 people came to his funeral to weep in the streets. The man who had ordered thousands of deaths was mourned by the people he had built schools for. Within months, the Cali cartel filled the vacuum. The cocaine trade didn't stop. It was reorganized. Because in this industry, taking out the supplier has never once killed the demand. It just opens the market for whoever is willing to fill it. The murder rate in Medellin has since fallen by over 90%. The city he built schools in is now one of the most visited cities in South America. The cable car system that connects its poorest hilltop comunas to the rest of the city, that infrastructure was partially funded by money that moved through the Medellin cartel. And the framework he used to build it: see the gap no one else sees, control every link in the chain, capture the regulators before they capture you. That framework gets applied every decade, in every industry, by people who have never heard of Medellin. The only thing Escobar got wrong was the last rule. The rule every great operator eventually has to learn. He didn't lose because the government was stronger. He lost because he became the target. And he couldn't stop being one. What do you think actually ended Pablo Escobar's empire? The government, the DEA, or his own ego? Drop your answer below. And follow Veridicus for the next story.